try to write short stories, and I getting the collection together and calling it Voices from the Wings, because I find that, Shakespeare said all the life's a stage. True. But there are a lot of people in the wings that don't really get heard from. Anyway, this story is not even a person. You're going to say, what the heck's happening? Because I've written it from the perspective of a puppy. And see how it goes. Okay. All right, so here goes with Pip the Pup. Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Pip the Pup. What next? I can just hear you humans saying something like that. But then I may be quite wrong, because you humans have become quite used to the unusual, haven't you? Look at the stuff that's on TV. You know the shows I mean. The latest has a guy who dies and then comes back as a girl. Now, that person who thought of that little beauty really has a strange sense of humor. It's not funny. No way, absolutely no way, would I come back as a bitch. Oh, and then there's the show that was on TV last week, the one in which a father and son somehow changed places. That's too weird to think about. I'd never want to trade places with old Gruff, the black lad who lives a few doors down the street. At least, I think that's who my father is. Of course, with us canines, you can never be too sure if you're not kennel bred. And, well, where my mother is concerned, well, how can I put it? Let's just say that she's one of those amiable bitches who just finds it impossible to say no. And so she ends up littering the neighborhood. Boy, it's got her into so much trouble. Her humans lock her up in their backyard, and she's in real danger. Just yesterday, she whined to me through the high picket fence that her mistress talked about having her spaded. Spaded? Oh, please. That can only mean one thing. This huge garden spade leaning up against the shed. A spade that could easily dig a very big hole. Don't ask me to explain it any further. I just hate to think that we pups could be the cause of her misery. Us and all our elder brothers and sisters. Well, there you are. You know something about my parents. So I'd better introduce myself better and the humans that I hang out with at number 57. Like my humans, I'm a bit of a mongrel. Though according to my mother, her mother had a pedigree a mile long. As you know, my name is Pip. That's what my humans call me. And they're called the Davidsons. Now, don't ask me why they're called the Davidsons. Mrs. Davidson, Mr. Davidson's name is Peter, and Grandpa's is Bob. And I heard him mention that his father was called Fred. There isn't a David among them. But they're called the Davidsons. That's human logic for you. Evidently, the name belongs to something called a clan, which they're very proud of. There is a piece of wood hanging on the living room wall which has a stag's head embossed on it in silver yet. And one day, Mike, who is 12, got very serious and told both Troy and I that it was the Davidson crest. And the boys both have scarves for something called the Davidson tartan. Once I began innocently playing with one of these scarves, and everyone, even Troy, boy, did they get mad. Oh, I could tell from their religious tones that I'd done something really sacrilegious. Mike told me in an extra deep voice, just like a grown-up, "You must never touch anything with the tartan, Pip, never. You see, the tartan comes from Scotland," he added with wonder. Then he broke down, and crying, "Good Pip," he hugged me. Mind you, Mrs. Davidson isn't a Scot. She's something called a Ukrainian, and makes really tasty dumplings called pierogi, and excellent sausage called kobasa. She laughs with delight and calls me her good Ukrainian Slovaka when I work on any pierogis and kobasa that I can get my jokes onto. Besides cooking, she's forever embroidering pieces of cloth which she places on the furniture. This is evidently another Ukrainian custom, as is coloring Easter eggs. I guess humans need all these little symbolic differences so that everybody can identify what breed they are. You know, it's terribly difficult to tell them apart. Even they have problems. They're not sure what breed Mrs. Evans across the road is. Her husband, they say, is Welsh. But Mrs. D thinks Mrs. Evans is Dutch. While Mr. D says, oh, she's Polish. One day, Mike, who goes around with Eric Evans, her son, said, she's Swedish because she got a letter from Sweden. Right? Of course, with us canines, it's so much easier to recognize the breeds unless one is dealing with mongrels. No one could get Chiquita, the Chihuahua from number 30, mixed up with my dad, Griff, who's a black Labrador. Well, there you are. These are my humans, the part Scottish, part Ukrainian Davidsons. And I'm glad that I adopted them on that fateful day when they were visiting my mother's people, her humans. Though I don't know why the Davidsons are called the Davidsons, I know why I'm called Pip. Mrs. D was reading a novel by some fellow called Dickens. I'll never forget that day when I just opened my eyes for the first time and was fast becoming conscious of things. There were 7 of us pups, crowded into a basket with my mum. As far as my newfound sight could make out, 3 of my brothers and sisters were a dirty, sort of light dun-coloured brown, like my mum. And the other 3 were black, just like old Gruff. My dad, maybe. But I was the oddball. I was dark brown and white. It was this difference that caught Mrs. Davidson's eye. Oh, look at the colouring on that one. Oh, isn't it cute? Oh, Peter, don't you think we could? I mean, I'm sure the boys would just love to have one. Her high, excited voice awakened me. Oh, look, he's looking at me. Wow, how adorable. It is a he, isn't it? Yes, my mum's master answered. She smiled and looked so nice. I decided to act. I peered up at this friendly woman who appreciated class, gave a yap and wagged my tail. Oh, look, he's wagging his tail. That was it. I became a Davidson. As Mr. D reached into the basket and picked me up, I heard my mum's master say, well, he's a lucky one. I hope we can find homes for the rest of them, or we'll have to put them to sleep. Now, that was a scream. Put them to sleep, indeed. Why, we spent most of our time sleeping as it was. Our snouts nuzzled up to our mother's convenient tucks. We snoozed the days away. This was my first realization that humans say the funniest things. Well, that's how I became Pip Davidson and was brought home to number 57. I'm not sure that Mr. D was so pleased, too pleased. And try as I might, I just couldn't please him. Whenever I tried, something just went wrong. But I get on really well with the rest of the family, especially in Troy, who is also a pup, a human pup, of course. He's my favorite deal. It's amazing how much a human pup and a real pup can have in common, especially when they both have good taste. We both love puddles, jam tarts, and going for a drive. And we both loathe, detest the neighbor's mangy cat, Cuthbert. Boy. You know, when Mr. D brought me home, He knew that I was cold and lonely. The basket with Mum and the rest of the little litter had been anything but lonely. It had been nice and warm. So when Troy just grabbed me from Mrs. D and held me tight but gently against his warm body, it felt good. And he didn't mind a bit when I just had to do what all puppies and humans have to do. But Mrs. D shrieked. She must have thought she had a narrow escape. Some humans just don't credit us pups with any sense of self-control. Troy didn't shriek or carry on. He just laughed and took me out into the backyard. Ah, boy, was I glad, because I was dying to get rid of that other stuff. And there is no way that a pup can do a number 2 unless he's on good old firm ground. I've since found out that the D's, particularly Mr. D, don't like me to decorate. That's what Mrs. D calls it, okay? Inside the house. The first time that I went, he put his foot in it. Humans hardly ever look where they're stepping. And then he had the nerve to blame me. Well, you should have heard him. He never called me pet. No, I was always that pup. So I learned to decorate in the garden. And you'd think that would be the end of the matter, wouldn't you? Yeah, but you don't know yet. At first, I did it on the lawn. Not everywhere, just in one neat pyramid. Yeah, he ranted about how terrible it looked. He really has no taste. I thought it looked decorative, you know. It broke up that long, boring expanse of green. I'll bet a human artist could make a pile of money, that is, by doing the same thing on a canvas. I tried to hide it in the flower bed. Boy, he didn't even let me finish. That was the most undignified moment of my life so far. And I hope that there are no worse to come. Finally, I found a good place where I could answer nature's call. That's Mrs. D's phrase. Right by the hedge between us and the Barkers, who lived next door. Well, it was a good place until Mr. D went up to the hedge one afternoon to shoot the breeze, as he calls it, with Mr. Barker. The Barkers. What a pair. Once again, don't ask me about human names. I've no idea why this mangy couple are called the Barkers. Do you know that old Barker doesn't even have hair on his head? He's mangy and blotchy all over. And Mrs. Barker only has a few long strands which continually sweeps away from her eyes. So of course, the Barkers don't bark. And they're hardly ever talk, but when they do, they whine. Whine only the way humans can do. And the D's have great difficulty understanding them. According to Mrs. D, they come from the north of some place called the Old Country. They make a noise about being a quiet couple. You know the type. They always object whenever I call out to my friends up and down the street. Whenever I try to have a good join with Daphne, that incredibly beautiful spaniel who lives 3 doors across the street. Old Barker will come out and create, more noise than I ever could. You know, shut up, you little perisher. And he'd usually accompany it with a stone or two that his pain is dreadful. And then he'll complain to the D's. I heard him tell Mr. D the afternoon they spoke by the hedge that has a real bad influence on Troy. Boy, did my ears prick out when I heard him whine, that awful grating whine that only humans can do. Hey, I don't like to say that, you know, but that pup, he's a bad influence on young lad. They made such a racket last afternoon. Poor Mrs. Barker, she likes the peace and quiet, she does. Not that we're complaining, you know. We're not like that, you know that. But she does like her peace and quiet. I almost barked, okay, you said that. But I've been told to shut up. I'm used to that. Mangy old Barker went on complaining, not just about me, but everything under the sun, even about the sun itself. The weather never satisfied him, never. It's too cold, it's too rainy, it's too hot, it's too sunny. On and on and on he can go. Anyway, I could see Mr. D had had enough. He was fidgeting this way and that. And in his haste to get away, he didn't look where he was stepping. Of course you know what happened. As neat as you please, his size 11 open sandals stepped right into the highest, most symmetrical of the pyramids, which I'd be careful to place close to the hedge as the comfort would allow. As soon as I saw what had happened, I made a dash for the safety of the front garden and heard Mr. D let out a bellow that definitely must have upset Mrs. Barker's peace and quiet. I was too scared to go into supper that night. Mrs. D called and called, but I paid no attention, not until my stomach began to call too. I was really careful to avoid Mr. D, who exchanged his sandals for a pair of slippers, until I heard him say some astonishing things. You know, in spite of everything, I like that house sometimes. It can't be all bad with the noise those two next door. You know? Oh, you should have heard him. I couldn't believe my pricked ears. My tail began to wag. And I actually dared to approach Mr. D. Mrs. D squealed, "Oh, look, darling, he knows you said something nice about him." Mr. D patted me on the head for the first time, and my day was made. Then it was Mrs. D's turn to say something even more surprising. "Oh, I know, my dear. I think she drives you to it. She's such a bitch." Everyone was shocked, except for Troy, who was too young to understand the compliment. Mike, who was 12, looked up at Mrs. D and exclaimed, "Well, Mom, I've never heard you call anybody anything like that before. That's a first." Even Mr. D joined in. The compliment had taken him by surprise. "Yes, dear, that's strong language for you. Anything happened recently with the old bat?" I wondered why he was being so smarmy this afternoon. He looked at Mrs. D questioningly, and I broke my ears, proud to, forward to attention. What did Mrs. D say? How would she justify complimenting the wizened old witch next door? Mrs. D got a little flustered at the surprise she'd caused and apologized. "I suppose I shouldn't have called her that. It's a little strong. I wagged my tail in agreement." Now Mrs. D was coming to her senses. Fancy complimenting Mrs. Barker like that. But really, she poured tea, including a saucer for me. I love warm tea, especially when Mrs. D puts condensed milk into it. She continued, "Mrs. Barker can be quite impossible at times. You should have heard her on Wednesday morning, I think it was. For a woman who likes peace and quiet, she can make a lot of noise when she gets going." I wagged my tail. Mr. D was listening attentively and half looking at Troy and Mike. Uh-oh. Anything I should know about? Wednesday morning. I knew exactly what Mrs. D was referring to, and this time Troy and Mike were innocent. So too was I. It was a lovely morning, and I'm sure that old Barker found something wrong with it. But by reasonable standards, it was a lovely sunny morning, and I was curled up in the middle of the backyard, fast asleep. As I told you, we puppies love sleeping when we're not out and about enjoying life. Well, there I was, with my front paws protecting my nose, and out of the blue, Cuthbert decides that it'd make a nice cushion. Can you imagine it? Yes, lots to find lawn, nice and soft, but Cuthbert wants something even softer. Dozy old Moggy. That's Mrs. D's word for him. Well, let me tell you, it isn't funny to be suddenly sat upon. Oh, yuck! The smell. Oh, what a stench. Cats must be related to skunks. Of course, I protected my dignity. I had to. Waking up rudely into a nightmare and suffocating from feline body odor, I sprang to life and bit out in panic. I was delighted to make contact with Cuthbert's tail. With a caterwaul that Daphne and the whole neighbourhood heard, he catapulted forward, dragging me a foot or so, but finally leaving me behind with a mouthful of mangy hair and a horrible taste. Wagging my tail, I stood triumphantly and watched them streak from our backyard to theirs, and then leap onto the back of Mrs. Barker, who was bending over talking to her precious rhubarb. Well, she broke her peace and quiet all right. Oh, I guess. Giving a shriek that rivaled Cuthbert's caterwaul. Cuthbert, who was unaccustomed to his mistress moving so quickly, clung onto her shoulders for dear life. Well, if a shriek had been something, it was nothing compared to the yell she gave as she reached back and swatted her pussykins off her. As Cuthbert fled to the crabapple tree, she turned around and saw me. I tried to make her happy, wagging my tail, but it didn't work. It just annoyed her even further. "Wagging your tail, are you bloody mongrel?" she yelled, and then added with a stream of words that my virgin ears did not understand. Mangy Cuthbert was trying to please her too. Safely in the crabapple tree, he too was wagging his tail and meowing louder than I'd ever heard him. But the mark was blamed me, of course. According to Mrs. D, Mrs. Parker said that Cuthbert had been snoozing by the kitchen steps when I'd sneaked up on him and bitten his tail. She said that she'd seen the whole affair. But then Mr. D, that's odd. And being no fool, he remarked that, how did the cat take her by surprise and jump on her back? Yeah. With that remark, he reached down and patted my head for the second time. Of course, the incident caused quite a stir in the neighbourhood. Gruff, my dad, barked his congratulations later that evening. That's the first time he's ever noticed me. Oops. Sorry. I'll call him back later. But, yeah, okay, kitchen up, okay, I'm jumping ahead, right. And patted me on the head for the second time, sorry. Of course the incident caused quite a stir, yes, and Daphne, that beautiful spaniel, as I went by her backyard last night, she wiggled her shapely spaniel hips at me and yelled, "Oh, you are so brave." Oh boy, those words really made me feel like a dog. No more puppy walking for me. Since that remark, I've been learning to walk like my dad. Even Mr. D has noticed. This morning he told Mike, "Clear up that dog's doo-doo. He's left the file by the garage." That cheered me up. No end, not that pup, but that dog. I mocked my appreciation, but he frowned, and turning to Mike said, "He's growing fast, son. He's going to be a big dog." I don't know. No, I don't know what he said. I don't know. Humans are puzzling at times. For example, they take all the excitement that's in our house at the moment. Everybody's talking about some place called BC. Mike explained it to Troy on Thursday. BC stands for British Columbia. We might be moving there because Dad says he can get better work there. Troy didn't like the sound of that. Nor did I. Work. Now, that's something that humans talk about a lot. And I have no idea what it is. I asked my mum one day, while we were having a good jaw wag by the picket fence, "Work? I don't know, son. It isn't eating, because my master comes home from work and is starving. And it can't be sleep, because they sleep as much as we do. All I know is it can be hard or easy. Usually hard. My master often says he's had a hard day's work. Only once or twice did he say he's had an easy day of work. I used to think that it was something that couldn't be done at home. But then my mistress said one day, I've been working hard all day when my master came home." And I know she hadn't been out. Humans are strange, son. Don't try to understand them too much. You won't succeed. Well, anyway, it's this mysterious thing called work that has the family all excited about moving to British Columbia. Oh my gosh. The Barkers are British. I don't think I'd like to go to a place full of barkers. But if Mr. D has to go there for work as one of the Davidsons, I'll support him. I did accept them for better or for worse. And it does seem that we're definitely going to BC. On Thursday night, Mr. D came home all excited as though he had nothing, and though he had nothing in his hands, he yelled, "I've got it!" as soon as he was in the front door. I've never seen the Davidsons so excited. Oh, man. Mike rushed to tell Eric Evans, and Mrs. D spent most of the evening on the phone to family in Vegreville. And then yesterday, Troy was the only one to take any notice of me. Everyone else was busy packing. And with humans, that's a big deal. They have so many things. With us canines, it's quite different, you know. We just bury a bone or two against a rainy day, and that's it. We don't carry a lot of junk around. Mind you, humans have to have some extra stuff, like clothes, for example. Have you ever seen a human in its bare skin? Oh, it's a mangy, ghastly sight. Oh, no wonder they wear clothes and make such a fuss over that. Mrs. D is the worst. She's always asking others, "How do I look? How do I look?" Once she even asked me. I barked softly and wagged my tail, my equivalent of, "You look fine, dear." Anyway, let's get back to the packing. Mike couldn't take all his junk. At first, he got mad, but then cheered up when Eric Evans bought all his comics and duplicate hockey cards, as well as some games for a few bucks. Mike likes money, but I think Eric Evans got a good deal. Okay? Took him 3 trips to get all the stuff to his place. But humans can ask fast when they want to. By Sunday morning, everything was packed, and some burly fellows came in a large van in the afternoon and loaded everything into it. Boy, Mr. D was in such a hurry, and he was always stepping over me and tripping over me. That dog's always getting underfoot. Troy, take him outside and play with him. And Troy did just that. He did not want to go to BC. He held me tight a lot of the time and repeated, "Nasty BC, nasty BC," over and over again. Now Troy gets upset with things very easily. But I've never seen him just sit and quietly cry the way he did. Everyone says that BC is a beautiful place. Why? They even have it on their license plates. Beautiful British Columbia, Illinois. You know. But I guess Troy just loves Edmonton. Anyhow, there he was hugging me and calling BC a nasty place when we both heard a squeal from inside. It was Mrs. D's upset noise. I heard Mr. D exclaim in exasperation, "That bloody pup!" My ears came to attention. What had I done? I couldn't be underfoot. I sat down and scratched my ear in wonder. Humans, they get upset so easily, especially Mrs. D, who came scurrying out of the door with her nose all screwed up and a dustpan held at arm's length. She found one of my early creations which had deposited on the hardwood floor behind the heavy hideaway in the rectory. I think that was the one I made the second day I was a Davidson. And time had not. On Monday morning, we all clambered into the station wagon and the journey to BC began. Everyone was excited except for Troy, who was very quiet and kept hugging me, even though I was no longer as small as I had been on that first day. Soon we were fast asleep. When we woke up, the car had stopped in front of a large building, which seemed to be crowded with strangers. I heard at least a dozen voices barking to each other. As we all got out of the car and walked up to the front entrance, the place intrigued me. But Troy didn't like it. He was crying and saying, "Nasty BC," as he tried to pick me up and carry me back to the car. Mrs. D told him that this was an animal hotel where I would be staying for a couple of weeks while they got everything arranged in BC. I was puzzled about it until she said the cute word. Troy did not understand the word quarantine, but I did. I barked agreement as Mike explained quarantine meant that I had to stay out of BC until everybody was sure that it was safe for me to enter. Daphne, you know, that nice little spaniel, whom I'll miss very much, knows exactly what quarantine is. When her humans moved back to Canada from Germany, she had to stay in quarantine in some kennels in a place called Toronto for 2 weeks, in absolute kennel luxury. She said that the people had treated her like royalty when she first moved. When she first moved into Australia, she became quite unpopular because she yapped on and on about Germany and quarantine, but after a couple of weeks, she settled down. There's no doubt that her travels and experience of quarantine gave her class. I imagine that most of the dogs in DC want to travel, but I won't yap about it. Well, not too much. I tried to cheer Troy up by wagging my tail and whooping softly at him, but it did no good. The head lady at the place took a liking to me. He's a friendly little fellow, isn't he? Such an unusual colouring. Oh, God, this is also unusual colouring. Handing me over to the lady soon stuck off. Mike, who was excited about the move, exclaimed, "We'll be back for you, Pip, in 2 weeks' time." That's what Mummy says. Mrs. D said, "Oh dear," and seemed sad as she tried to cheer up a silent Troy. I tried to help her by barking, "Smile, Troy. It's only 2 weeks, then what larks we'll have in DC." And to emphasize my good mood, I wagged my tail furiously. But Troy just burst into tears, turned round and sharply ran back to the car. Well, that was Monday, and I've been here several days now. Life isn't too bad, but that Daphne can sure tell a tale. Or else there are a lot of difference in quarantine hotels. I don't have my own kennel, as she said she had, but share a big barred room with many others of all shapes and sizes and ages. And there are other rooms around us with lots and lots of guests in them. I mean, boy, do we have some characters here. Most of the others are cheerful, but none have heard about quarantine, so I've been busy explaining. Now, there's some really good things about this place. Nobody minds how much you talk, and most of us talk a lot. Sometimes there's several conversations going on at once. I won't bore you with a description of the other guests. First of all, there are too many, and second, most of them are just ordinary Fidos. Some like it here, because the food is better than what the humans have given them at home. Now that surprises me, because it's just starch. Not the haute cuisine that Daphne had described. Of course, there is a minority that I have, that are mopey, glumpy lot. One of them is in our room. He's a real cheerful Charlie. Oh, he spends most of his time sleeping, but when he's awake, he keeps saying that we are in a concentration camp, whatever that is, and that some of us will be sent to labs. I keep telling him, labs are a dog, that my dad is a lab. But he just shakes his head and keeps on mumbling about labs and how we'll all be put to sleep. There's that word sleep again. He's crazy, just like my mum's master who used that phrase the day I became a Davidson. And the Davidson I most certainly am. This moment, I had to remind the humans here of that. A couple came in with their son, a bit older than Troy, I imagine, but not at all like him. Oh no, this geek, whatever you want to call him, looked at me through his thick green spectacles and immediately grabbed me with a podgy hand and declared, "I want this one." Gentle he was not. Handled me like a piece of meat, prodded me, pulled my legs. This way and that, not once did the character look me in the eyes. And when he finally put me down, after inspecting my paws, my ears, my tail, and even my willy, I backed myself into a corner. He went off with his parents and looked at the others, and I thought it was safe, but oh no, back they came. Yeah, the nerve pointed to me, "I want that one. He can play with Snookums when I'm at school. I'll call him Diddums." As he reached forward to molest me again, I heard the brat's mother say, "A dog? I don't know, Marmaduke. Cats and dogs don't get along together. Not as a rule, dear. Oh, they will, or else I'll beat them. And with this unpleasant words, he tried to grab me. Snookums, a cat, and me, a Davidson. Huh? Well, there was only one thing to do. I had to act. But, back right up against the corner, I raised the hairs on the back of my neck, bared my teeth, and gave the fiercest growl that my few months would allow. Nerdy Marmee immediately stepped back. Nasty dog, you're not Diddums. I snarled back, indeed I'm not. Diddums was a sloppy name, and I don't like cats. And anyway, I'm a Davidson. As they picked back off, the food came with the starch, and the girls came with the starch and water. Of course, they had the nerve to complain about me to her. She said, oh, that's surprising. He was brought in by a family with 2 boys, and we're told that he got along well with children. It's such a shame when they don't adjust to others and miss their chance. Well, I got to back at the stupid creature also get on with children, but that character doesn't qualify. And as for missing my chance, I had plenty of chances to have fun with Troy and Mike and the rest of the Lees once this quarantine is over. The girl was really a brainless wonder. She told her companion, as they were filling up all the guests with filling up all the guests' water dishes, I wish we were allowed to keep some of them longer. The other girl had more sense. But we have to have strict time limits. Don't worry, they won't even feel the needle. Let's clear out these 2 pens and then put the needle candidates into them ready for the vet tomorrow afternoon. The needle. I wagged my tail. Daphne's favorite story was about the needles she'd had while in quarantine and how they made her a super bitch. You know, who was immune to lots of the things. I wondered why I never received mine yet. But darn it, I never did get the needle. Not that I've ever admitted to anyone. The next morning, I was getting really excited about the needle when I suddenly heard Troy's voice calling. Before I knew it, he was hugging me so tight that I had to yell. Troy, honey, not so tight, you're crushing him. Mrs. Davidson was the usual kind self. He's a lucky one, the lady in charge of the hotel said. The vet was going to put him to sleep this afternoon. And we could hardly get this one to sleep at all. Mrs. D pointed to Troy. It's been several days of misery. Sleep. Aren't humans funny about it? They seem to put so much store by it. Sometimes Mr. D, when he's in an irritable mood, says, I couldn't sleep last night, or Mrs. D's favorite phrase, I didn't get a wink. As for me, I can sleep any time when I'm comfy. Soon, I was back in the station wagon, nestled in Troy's lap. I didn't understand what the Davidsons were talking about. It seems that DC had been a disappointment. But after the excitement of the hotel, I was too tired. I heard Mrs. D say, well, my dear, let sleeping dogs lie. I agreed, wagged my tail, snuggled into Troy's shoulder, and joined him in a comfortable snooze.